right, everyone, thank you so much for joining today. Welcome to Fridays on the Farm. This series is a collaboration between the Minnesota Soil Health Coalition, University of Minnesota Extension, the Minnesota NRCS, the North Central Region of SARE, and Renville and Redwood Soil, Water, and Conservation Districts. The Minnesota Soil Health Coalition is a producer-driven, producer-led soil health organization offering information, support, and networking to Minnesota farmers. My name is Taylor Becker, and I am an extension educator for agricultural water quality with the University of Minnesota. Today, we'll be in the field with Jennifer Hahn, the Coalition Coordinator for the Minnesota Soil Health Coalition, and Holly Hatlewick, District Manager of the Renville County Soil and Water Conservation District. We'll be talking with Craig Mold, who farms in Rush City, about soil health and how changes in management have changed his soil over time. Craig and his son, Andre, were dairy farmers until 2002, ran beef for some time, and and farmed just under 1,000 acres of corn and soybeans now. They have been reducing tillage over time and are using vertical tillage. Their soils range from sandy loam to tight clays, and they grid sample their soils for nutrient management. If you have any questions at all during the session, please feel free to type them into the Facebook live stream chat box or comment section, and our hosts, Jennifer and Holly, will be happy to discuss them with Craig once we get to that portion of the session. All right, and we are going to go ahead and send the video out back to the field.
Good morning. I'm Holly Hatlewick with the Renville SWCD and affiliate member of the Minnesota Soil Health Coalition. We are here at our Friday on the Farm event north of Rush City, with the Mold family. Good morning.
Morning.
So with us today,
I'm Craig Mold. I'm Andre Mold.
And Margaret Mold.
So Craig, tell us a little bit about your operation here.
Well, my dad bought this back in 1954. All that was here that's here now is the farmhouse and just a portion of the barn and the granary. Pretty small operation at that time. Is 120 acres. He did have a job. He worked at the feed mill just about eight miles away and farmed on the side. He did that for 5 years until he got on his feet. Basically, he started out with nothing. Basically, so started out like all the other farmers did. Had a few cows, had a few hogs back then, and even chickens. Typical farm in the late 50s. Then as time went on and as I got older, to start helping in the operation. With rent more ground, we added more cows, just built the operation from the 120 acres originally till right now it's 750, and then we actually rent another 250. So it's grown significantly. And we brought him in approximately full-time in 1995, but he did help before that while in school, just like I did. And as far as tillage practices, I mean, we were the typical, disc the corn stalks twice in the fall before you got them plowed down, and then in the spring, you'd go out and disc it again. And I recall the time where I came in the driveway with the tractor, and my dad said, I can still see a couple stalks out there standing up. He said, you go out there and get those discs down. He said, we don't want to be seeing any of those out there. So we've come a long ways from no residue at all on top to basically now we're planting in, they figure about 85% residue is what we're doing now. So there's been a transition there, that kind of wish my dad could have seen it. He passed away 20 years ago, and it's just something different that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. So Craig, tell me, what is your crop rotation?
Corn and soybeans. Typically, it's sometimes we'll do 2 years of beans in a row. Just depends on how things work out. But right now, it's just corn and beans. We're thinking about trying to get some small grains into the operation if possible, which would be more conducive to the cover crop this far north, to get something in relatively early. Like this time of the year, we could be seeing cover crops. Now, typically, we don't get our soybeans off until the middle of October, and corn generally is just about the end of October is when we get started. So it's a little bit later than average.
Sure. You kind of mentioned our location. We're pretty far north. Margaret, do you mind telling us what kind of soils are we looking at up here this far north?
Well, the soils that we have are a result of the glacier that came through a long time ago. And it has sandy loam with a clay base.
So challenging, to say the least. So, you get a lot of rain, probably disappears fast, but with that clay base, you kind of hit maybe a restrictive layer in there.
Yep.
Challenging, to say the least. That's interesting. So you would also, Andre and I were talking a little bit ahead of time. We were talking about where we're at in the state. What did you mention about the crop insurance side of things?
I guess we were talking about, we're about 30 miles north of us is where the crop insurance cuts off for the corn around here.
So as far as diversity of crop, you're a little bit limited just by your growing season.
Yeah.
And so that adds a whole nother layer of challenging
Yeah, it does.
farming.
I should have mentioned earlier that typically it was dairy in this area.
Sure.
Everybody had a few animals and things like that. So there was a lot of small grains and hay, alfalfa, and everything that were grown. And as time progressed and farmers went out of business, it switched right now to more of a grain-based farming situation.
Sure. So we kind of touched on the family history a little bit. Why don't you tell me about, the three of you in this operation? When did you start down the path of soil health and maybe going away from Dad's mantra of making sure you don't see a single corn stalk out in the field?
Okay. Yeah, we went from the plow, the moldboard plow, and gradually we went into, it was called the
Land
Commander, which was its shanks on it on 15-inch centers. Well, basically that turned the soil over just as bad as the moldboard plow, but it left a little more residue on top. Problem with that was we have a tendency when we got a lot of moisture in the spring, a wet spring, when you would drive into the field, you would sink as far as you went down with that tillage machine. And we had problems with that. So then we moved to a vertical till or an inline ripper that was on 30-inch centers and went where we had to go, where we had problems with compaction. And that helped sustain some of our soil characteristics that we needed, soil structure, and we could go in on a wet year and still be able to go. And since then, we basically parked that machine and only used it where we have a problem, like if we run a lot of wagons or whatever in the field, we'll use that to rip that compaction up. But we just haven't been using it lately. So we're just basically to the vertical till right now.
Okay. So step me through kind of the process of your corn soybean rotation. So, what tillage happens when in those systems?
Well, in corn, in the fall after corn, we'll hit it once with the accelerator and then just leave it. Basically, what we do is we'll put down potash first, then we'll go over with the accelerator and then leave it till spring. And then before planting, we'll hit it lightly again to to get the soil loosened up just the top 2 inches. Get that, so it kind of dries out. In this area, we have more problems with getting our soil to dry out enough to plant versus, too dry to plant. So we'll do that. And then soybeans going to corn, we'll just wait till spring, and then we'll lightly go over the soybean stubble after we've applied our plow down fertilizer. I call it plow down. The fertilizer going into corn, and then after the corn is to V5 or V6, then we'll come over and top dress the rest of it. So there's split application on our fertilizer, and we do use the urease inhibitors on it too to keep it in place.
Sure. And so when you are top applying, right? Am I understanding that right? The first pass is just top apply granule, and then you're incorporating it with the vertical till.
Incorporated about 2 inches.
Okay.
2 to 3 inches, depending on the field.
Mm-hmm.
It's enough to cover it, keep it stable, and it's in the root zone.
Yep.
And then also with the planter, we put 10 gallons of 1034 starter along with the sulfur, and then a few other goodies. I guess they call USA 500, things like that to get
Sure.
it started. In our climate up here, typically we have a cold start, so we have to be careful not to plant too early, even though it's fit, because we typically get a frost that first or second week of May. And if the corn is up too far, it'll freeze it off and it starts all over again.
Sure.
So typically we try to plant corn the first week of May, and then soybeans by the mid-May.
Okay. And so on your corn, are you looking at like an 85-day corn or a little longer?
Well,
or
years ago, we had 85-day corn before we would dry it, because we'd use the picker and couldn't dry the corn. Now we go anywhere from, last year was 92 to 95 days.
Okay.
That's what we've been pushing. It's the only time we got hurt was last year, because we had a cold, wet year last year. And the 95-day didn't finish as well as we would have liked it to. So.
Okay.
And the soybeans, we typically are about a 1.4 on the soybean. That's what we're at.
So what prompted your decision to maybe start looking at reducing tillage, or, maybe reducing your number of passes related to tillage?
Well, I think originally it was, the amount of hours we were putting on tractors plus the amount of fuel we were using. Time constraints. We had cattle back then too, and it was just the new machinery that came out that enabled us to do that. Years ago, they didn't have those machines that you can do that. Basically, you had a plow and a disc, and that was about it. And you had to make do with that. And now with the new machines that we have, we're able to, to do more. Plus, I've been on the Soil and Water Board, I think it's 16 or 18 years now, and kind of got a taste of that, what was going on, for soil quality and, water quality. And then I had a daughter, of course, that learned to love that kind of thing too, and now she's doing that full time. And she kind of pushed us a little too, and my son Andre, he kind of nudged me along a little bit too, because I was kind of still set back in the old days, the way I grew up. So it was just a gradual process. We did just a few things every year, and we're not the type to jump both feet into something, because all of our income comes from the farm. I mean, we can't afford to have a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
So we're doing it in increments now, and working toward less tillage all the time, as our soils let us.
That's awesome. So you mentioned the Soil and Water Board. Are you still on the Soil and Water Board?
I'm still on there.
That's great. Are you guys finding that the Soil and Water and NRCS and University of Minnesota, all of those agencies are kind of helping you as you transition, or are you finding it's more neighbors and farmer to farmer is where you're getting guidance? I don't want to say guidance, because you know what you're doing, but resources maybe.
Well, yeah, and I think a starting point is, when, like on the soil and water, you're able to access some of that information. And a lot of times that doesn't really relate to your operation or your area so much, because the soils change in our area. You can go 3 miles and it's completely different soil.
Sure.
And when you get the farmers together, especially neighbors that have similar soil types, you kind of watch what they do and see if it's successful or not. And sometimes it's a good move, sometimes not so good. And so we really value the farmers' input on it just because of that. And farmers will tell you if it works or not. They don't always tell you exactly what their yields are, but and you can see if it works or not.
Yeah.
And to me, that's invaluable to be able to do that. We do drive around a lot just to look to see what the neighbors' crops are, because there's a little different variations to who's doing what, and it's a learning process.
Well, and that learning is one of the really important reasons that the Minnesota Soil Health Coalition was formed. And you guys have a significant tie to that. Your daughter, Jennifer Hahn, is the coordinator of the Minnesota Soil Health Coalition, and she has been instrumental in its growth and development. And coming up on September 10th and 11th in Marshall will be the first Soil Health Coalition school. And it's going to be a great opportunity for farmers to get together with other farmers. And we're going to be looking at some really on the ground practices that people are implementing. And it's going to be just that opportunity to network. They might not tell you their yields while they're there, but they might give you some other trade secrets, right? That's really interesting. So I wonder if it's okay time to transition over to the tillage equipment. So Andre, I wonder if you would maybe mind explaining this to us over here?
Sure.
Great.
And these are the soiled undies that we buried for the 6 weeks challenge. The same soil type. The undies on the left are under soybeans with their regular management with the vertical tillage. And the undies on the right, same management, but a highly compacted area. And it's really cool to see the differences between the two. We had a total blowout with the regular management, but we still had some good rooting going on where it was compacted. So this was kind of nice to be able to see we're still getting biological activity. Yes, and that one is stuck together with roots. Beautiful soiled undies.
All right, well, we're back. Andre, why don't you tell us about this piece of equipment we're standing in front of?
Well, it's an accelerator. I guess you can set the gang angles anywhere from 5 degrees to like a 1 degree angle, depending on, how much you want to, incorporate anything into the soil.
Sure.
So
not everybody that's listening and watching with us today is probably a farmer. Why don't you explain a little bit more to us what the gang is?
okay. This cuts and sizes the corn stalks or bean stubble, and back here they call these the treader wheels. This helps incorporate the soil and the residue that comes through here, and then back here is the rolling basket that pushes it down and firms it down and keeps it from blowing away.
Sure. So you had mentioned sizing the residue. So what type of head do you have on your combine? Are you guys using a chopping head, or is it more of a standing stock, for example, with corn stalks that you're sizing? Or
we do have what's called a snapping roll head. There's no actual chopper underneath it,
okay,
but there are knives that go together like this, and it just kind of pinches them,
sure.
and as it pulls them down, it just kind of keeps pinching them and destroying the stock on the outside.
Sure.
So then the water infiltration can get in there, and then it can deteriorate
Sure.
and turn back into soil again.
So about how much standing residue do you have once the combine head has gone across the field?
We usually keep it about 18 inches or 20 inches above.
Sure.
So, because then it kind of catches the snow
Sure.
too, and then it seems to not damage the tires as much also,
Mhm.
because when you drive, then it just kind of pushes them over rather than poking them up through the bottom.
Sure. So, being able to adjust the pitch like you'd mentioned on the gang is going to be, it just gives you that many more options with this piece of equipment
Right.
versus having to have another hunk of iron that maybe you don't pull out every season.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yep.
So you'd mentioned incorporation. What are you incorporating with this besides residue? Give us some examples.
Before we go and plant in the spring, we go and, like my dad was saying before, he called it a plow down.
Sure.
And then we incorporate that in, and then we leave it for a little bit, and then we try to leave it for a little bit, and it seems to settle the soil down a little bit. So then when we go and plant, it's not quite so dusty, and it keeps the topsoil in place if we can.
Sure. Have you ever used this to incorporate cover crops?
No, we haven't. There are kits you can get that puts a bulk bin up front, and it's like a air system that pushes the seed out, and it drops it. I think it's right in front of the treader wheels here, and then this incorporates it, and then that firms it down again and keeps it from blowing away.
Okay. So have you used cover crops in your operation?
Yes, we have. I think it was 2013. We couldn't plant all most of our crop. We only got 150 acres of beans planted. So at that time we had a disc and a packer.
Sure.
And so we disked it, and then had the co-op spread little fertilizer and cover crop, and then we just took our packer at the time and just rolled it in.
Sure. Like a smooth roller or like a Brilliant packer?
It was a Brilliant.
Sure.
Yep.
And that worked pretty good for you.
It did work really well.
Yeah, interesting. Do you think cover crops is something you would maybe look at more down the road? I know your dad had mentioned maybe expanding your rotation.
Right. Yeah. If we can get some small grains and stuff, I mean, that would really give it a jump start. After beans, it's kind of iffy up here, and after corn, I mean, it's really, we struggle sometimes to even get it tilled.
Sure.
After corn, because the ground freezes so fast.
Yep.
It really, doesn't have any time to germinate in the fall.
Sure.
But it could germinate in the spring.
Yeah.
And we're always looking into options.
Sure. And so just to clarify for our audience, when you talk about till in the fall, you're talking about running this vertical till and more or less sizing residue.
Yes.
Because your dad had alluded you're really not doing any deep tillage.
Right. This has a maximum tillage depth of 3.5 inches.
Sure.
Generally, we only till like 2 inches, and we're set at about a 3-degree gang angle, because otherwise, when you go through the corn stalks, it seems to pull all the root balls up on the top, and then it gets really rough.
Sure.
And what we're experimenting with is trying to keep the root balls in the ground as much as possible, and seeing if that helps with the water infiltration going down into the soil.
Sure. Yep. And maintaining that high level of residue on the surface that your dad mentioned earlier.
Right. Yep.
Too aggressive, you'd be burying it all like Grandpa.
Right. Exactly.
Not that Grandpa didn't do the best he could with the tools he had then, but we maybe have different tools now.
Well, the technology is really changed.
Exactly. Yep. And that's all part of this transition too. Your dad kind of mentioned the family dynamic of, you know, a little bit of pressure from you, a little pressure from your sister, and just kind of learning from others. And so it's not necessarily that it was wrong or different. We just know that much more, and the tools are different.
Right.
Okay, so we have a question coming in from our audience. So Andre, the question that we have coming in is, have you noticed a reduction in erosion since you guys have been using this reduced tillage technique?
Yeah, we really have. It seems to, you know, pin things down a lot better. And when we took our disc before, it kind of scoured the ground.
Sure.
And it moved a lot of the soil, you know, laterally.
Sure.
And then, especially like on a hillside, you get the water coming down, and then it would just, you know, start a gully. And this, you're not going down as far, and it doesn't scour it as much. So it's leaving, you know, a hard surface underneath, which doesn't, you know, tend to gully.
Sure. So tell us again, and maybe your dad mentioned, how long have you really been just focusing on this one piece of tillage? Where, you know, has it been a 3 year, 5 years that you've really been looking at the reduced till?
Right. This is our third, will be our fourth full year with this piece of equipment.
Okay.
So we're still in the transition stage.
Okay. So I have a follow-up question before our Facebook question. When did you notice that change in erosion? Was it year 1 or year 3?
Well, it seemed to pretty much right away, but as far, you know, it seems like as we keep going, it seems to be getting, you know, more stable.
Better and better.
Yep.
Yep. And that's what I was fishing for a little bit, is that often when we're talking with customers and farmers about soil health, it's, you know, it's tough sell that things don't happen instantly and overnight, but really you can see significant changes quite quickly when you're reducing that tillage
Yep.
to your soil.
Yep.
So we have another question from our audience.
Have you noticed a difference with water management, you know, infiltrating, being able to get out in the field sooner, less tracking?
Okay. So Andre, the question is, have you noticed a difference in your carrying capacity of the soil? Are you able to get into the field sooner? Are you finding that you're having to deal less with Mother Nature and her whims when it comes to being able to get out to the field?
Yeah. Like we were saying earlier, we transitioned from that Brilliant Land Commander, which had like a parabolic, to like a more of a straight-legged ripper, and that kind of helped firm the soil so we could travel across the top of it, even if it was, you know, wet on, you know, underneath.
Sure.
And then with this, there's actually wing pressure. When you put the wings down, there's always hydraulic pressure. So if you do go over a wet spot, it distributes the weight all the way across from one side to the other. So it kind of holds itself up. If one side goes down, the other side, you know, compensates.
Yep.
And keeps it up out of the ground.
Interesting. And so the portion of that question that I forgot to ask was, have you noticed a difference in infiltration as well then in your soils?
Yeah.
Like water infiltrating.
Yeah, it seems to. I mean, this spring we planted some spots, and it's still growing in ditch bottoms where it hasn't in quite a few years. And hopefully, you know, it's because of our management skills and what we've been learning. Oh.
Yeah. So do you do all your own spraying, or do you hire that, maybe the co-op?
Yeah, we hire our fertilizer spreading and spraying from the co-op, because it's just my dad and I.
Sure.
And they can do it so much faster.
Yep.
And you know, it just seems to work for us.
Yeah.
You know, the way we're set up.
And does it maybe give the co-op a little bit more opportunity to get into your field when they maybe couldn't get in that 3 miles down the road that your dad mentioned?
Yeah.
Flexibility.
We've had, you know, talks with the operators and stuff, and they like coming out here because they said they can travel generally when they can't travel somewhere else. And the ground is a lot smoother, you know, rather than after, you know, like a normal kind of tillage, you know, practice.
Right. Probably less wear and tear on not only your equipment, but theirs as well, because you're not bouncing across those furrows.
Right, exactly.
Interesting. So I want to circle back to the infiltration and talk a little bit more about your soils specifically. Have you seen any sort of change in your soil? I don't want to say, you know, necessarily structure, but your soil function, maybe, perhaps?
I guess it seems to help with the growing of some weeds with the suppression of the residue that's left on the top from the corn stalks.
Okay, that's interesting. So what do you think it's really done with the residue? Is the residue still just staying in place, or do you think the residue is breaking down more rapidly?
This year especially, it seems to be breaking down quite a bit quicker than past years.
Take another look and talk about that soil specifically.
Yes, so I dug this up last night. And what I really should have done is also taken a picture of what the residue looks like today. So the pictures in the slides that you saw, that was about a month and a half ago in the soybeans and corn. And when I went out there yesterday to dig up the undies and to dig this up, there's not a lot of residue left. So that was really excellent. And I'm Jennifer Hahn, aka Jennifer Mold. I'm the proud daughter of Craig and Margaret and the proud sister of Andre. We have another sister, Erica. She lives in England. She doesn't get jazzed about soils. Weird, huh? So, so I dug this up and just wanting to show the soil structure. And again, you know, we have sandy loam surface. And so building soil structure, it takes a lot longer when you're in sandier, lighter soils. And what we're seeing with this is we're getting really good aggregation. Oh, sorry, worm. So many worms are killed in the, you know, conquest of looking at soils. And the roots are holding it together really nicely. And we have small and we have large soil aggregation going on. And so this is something that we did not see in the past. You know, when we look at the surface of the soil, it was smooth, flat, and then as it would dry up, we would get those cracks. And trying to dig in it, I'm not weak, but it made it hard. And so digging in this nowadays, I don't have troubles at all. Especially the older I get, the easier I want it to be to dig. But so I've been really interested in how their management has been affecting their soils. Obviously, you know, I love learning about soils. I love, you know, when you look at a soil, you can learn a lot. It's telling you a story, and you can see that going on in here. You know, when I left and I went to college, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be an agronomist or a conservationist. And I took my first soils class and I fell in love. And unfortunately, these guys haven't heard the end of it since then with talking about soils. And if you can tell, my brother, he is the equipment expert, knowing, you know, different options that are out there, how to modify things. And, you know, he's really understanding what that does to the soil. And I think it's been really neat to be able to combine those together to look at, you know, what we're doing out there and digging it up and looking at the soils to see, you know, how that affects these soils in this location of Minnesota. And yeah, we were talking about a little of the family dynamic, how my dad, you know, took a little bit of coaxing, but it hasn't been terrible, but we still sit around and talk. You know, there's always discussions, and it's really nice. They don't kick me out for Thanksgiving and Christmas. They still, you know, let me be part of the conversation. But yeah, and I really think it's really neat. You know, there's 100 different ways to do things, And there's so many options. And what you have to do, you know, like what these guys are doing, they're experimenting, they're trying it out. They're not jumping in, you know, 100% in year one and setting themselves up. They're going along and they're monitoring as it goes to really learn to see if it's working for them, and talking with other farmers and looking what other farmers are doing to see how it's working for them. And we have a question from Facebook. So with the reduced tillage, have you noticed any difference in insect pressure?
No, I think we've seen anything. Actually, years ago, we used to almost every year had to spray for soybean aphids, you know, if aphids were in the area. And now that we're able to get our beans in earlier, it seems like if the aphids do come, they only stay a short time and they never get to the 250 threshold where they'll fly off to another field that's younger soybeans and more tender. And we haven't had to spray for soybean aphids for what, I bet you it's been 10, 12 years.
Yep.
And you know, we don't have any problems with slugs or
No.
anything like that because of the residue. What we have seen is more consistent visual of the soil as you look across the field. It's become more uniform over the years, where our soil will change within the field with the different soil types, and they would be different colors in the spring when you were planting. And now what we've noticed the last few years is it's just kind of all the same color. And a little bit the first few inches, the consistency is a lot more uniform.
So we have areas, you know, like the low areas, low flat, they're heavier, getting close to that clay base texture. And then we have sandier knobs out there. And in between, you know, sandy loam areas. So there's a huge variability. And yeah, you're noticing, so when you see that change in color, that's the organic matter stabilizing. So instead of having our high spots eroding, you know, and losing that topsoil, over thickening the low areas, we're not having that erosion anymore. And we're in the building phase, because step one, stop erosion, because if you are having erosion, you can't build your soils. So now we're on that step two where we're able to build that organic matter back up. And that, I mean, that's a great visual, and that also helps with nutrient management, because you guys grid sample, because there's just so much variability out here. But that also helps, you know, the increase in organic matter not only helps, you know, you to hold on to nutrients in there, but it helps them, you know, with your CEC to be able to function better with the nutrients that are available. And do you notice that any change in yields? Is it more uniform too?
It's a lot more uniform than originally when we started. We could have, you know, swings of, you know, like for potash or phosphorus. Phosphorus, not so much, because our soil naturally here is high in phosphorus. You know, I don't know how much exactly is available, but it's high in phosphorus. So we don't apply a lot of phosphorus because naturally it's there. We'll put some in the starter. It was the potash, you know, where you'd see the difference, and a few other micronutrients. But after, let's see, about 6 years of PRT on our fertilizer, we can see now that things have stabilized out. So some of these fields now we're just able to go out and flat spread because they're pretty uniform. You know, and we see in our rented fields, if we pick up a field, the variability is there, and it takes a few years to get everything uniform again. And so it helps.
So that helps with the nutrient management side of things and timing. So if that can help, you know, reduce the costs that are needed, you know, to analyze and to apply the fertilizer. And then are we also seeing cost benefits by reduced tillage, where less wear and tear, less fuel, less time? I know in one of those slides we had a picture from when Andre was out doing the vertical till, and it showed on there the gallons usage out there.
Yep, gallons per acre and then acres per hour.
Yes.
Yep.
So that sped everything up for you guys?
Quite a bit.
Yeah. So with all your extra time, you're not coming and visiting me or calling me. I don't know what they're doing with their extra time, but not hanging out with me.
Well, we're not paying the fuel guy as much either. I mean, basically for the 1,000 acres, it's about 3,000 gallons of fuel.
Mm-hmm.
Is all we're using right now. That's a lot less than when we started, or when I started. So
Yeah.
this is my 50th. This was my 50th crop. So we used to, spend a lot more on fuel back then.
And so Dad, you do the harvesting. So when you're out combining, was that last year? It was kind of wet and you're still able to get through, and the neighbor rutted up their field?
Yeah, we've got pretty good sized combine. What's that?
7088.
Yeah, it's a
Case
class
International
7 combine. It's got the duals but we don't have the pusher in the back. But we were able to get into everything in very few places that we even made indentations in the field. And we had neighbors that did some conventional tillage that have tracks on their combines along with pushers in the back that put ruts in there 6 to 8 inches deep, and it was just across the fence line. So it was the same soil types and everything. And, it just, I don't, excuse me, watching the monitor on the combine too over the years, years ago it could swing, 50 bushel or 60 bushel more, and from one place in the field to the other. Now it's a lot more consistent. I mean, even that we're this far north, 200 bushel corn is really, that's the norm right now. Where years ago, I remember my dad coming in the driveway and saying 100 bushel corn, that was a success. And now if we have 100 bushel corn, it's a crop failure, basically. So even though we're this far north, I think with all the new practices coming and hybrids and everything else, we're able to get some good crops.
Excellent. It sounds like we have another question.
So with the transition, have you seen at least the yield consistency or any other dollars saying it's even yield, but have you noticed savings time with the same yield?
Oh, sure. So with the transition that you guys have done, with your reduction in tillage, have you noticed a yield increase, a yield plateau? Everything's evening out, better, worse? And does that equate to cost savings or, better economics?
Well, we saw as good a yields, with what we're doing now, except for last year when I mentioned we had 48 inches of rain from the 1st of April until the 1st of September. And also it was cooler than normal. So the number of GDUs, we were short about 150 GDUs for the year. And that took a toll on our corn crop. Beans, not so much. The beans last year were just about 50 bushel. And, typically we're 60, 65. We have hit 85, but and corn is anywhere from 190 to 2.25, basically. But I think where we are, it's more weather affects us a little bit more than what we're doing out in the field, because Mother Nature, we always say Mother Nature bats last, and that affects us down here or up here quite a bit.
So you didn't see a yield drag at all with?
No, and that's why we went this
All right, everyone. So we're having some technical difficulties with our mics out in the field. So I'll just take this opportunity to remind you guys that there are several resources for soil health listed here on the slide, as well as in the comments of the video. So go ahead and check out those resources for any more information. Again, we apologize for this technical difficulty. I'm sure we'll be back out here in the field in just a couple of minutes or so.
Type operations. And so what we want to do is try to find ways that each operation can reduce, their inputs or have a way so that they can get through these tricky market times, because you want to be successful and you want to be able to keep going for the next year and following years after that. So yeah, looking at the numbers, you guys have been doing a really good job of finding ways to cut costs while still maintaining excellent yield.
Right, and over the years ago, we used to have, I think it was 1.2 pounds of nitrogen for every pound or for every bushel of corn you wanted. So, well, we've been rationing it down somewhat over the years. This past year, we were between 0.8 and 0.9 pounds of nitrogen put on to a bushel of corn. So we're working toward that area. We're not out there to win the yield contest. Basically, we're there. We look at the net and not the gross profit. Net is what pays the bills, and we're happy with that. If we can net what we want to net and not have to spend that extra money, that's the route we're going.
And in the future, especially with my poking and prodding, we will at some point try little test strips of cover crops. The youngest tries to get what they want, right? So trying it out, and that's the plan for the future, doing field size test strips. So not 20 feet wide, but a pass out there. Give some representative areas, but not so large that if something doesn't go right, we're in a pickle. So that's what we're looking forward for the future. And they're doing a fantastic job of increasing their soil structure, organic matter, and all the soil critters out there too. It's really cool. You dig out there. And I remember when we were kids, before we go fishing, there was one spot that we would dig to get worms, and that was by the tree that was on the other side of the road. It's not there anymore. But that's where we would dig to get worms. Nowadays, all you'd have to do is go out into the field and dig, and you're ready to go fishing.
And it, yeah, we do tillage. It's basically we're doing tillage, but at that 2-inch depth, it seems like the worms don't care. I mean, they've been increasing over the years. It's not like you're turning the soil over and everything, or going way down and ripping out all the channels and everything else. And we're
at that depth. It seems like the freeze thaw does have a bigger impact when we're just doing the light tillage on top rather than a full tillage.
Yeah, when I went out to the field yesterday, I saw on the surface of the soil a bunch of pores from past roots and from earthworms coming through. So you still have those straws there to be able to, when that water comes, just to suck down that straw and get it off the surface.
Plus, we do have some fields that are heavier clay, and typically, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, going into soybeans or even corn, when there was no residue left on top, and you'd get a wet time of the year in the spring, and then you get a day like today when the sun would bake on it, and the corn would try coming up through, we'd get crusting, and you'd have to get out the rotary hoe or whatever. And if anybody's ever used a rotary hoe, you know what it does. You don't like to look behind you because you've got plants that you tear up and everything, but you have to do that to break the crust. Since we've been doing this, there's enough residue on top that we don't have to worry about crusting at all. It pokes through. You know, in the first year that we did it, I sent pictures to Jennifer saying, those beans are never going to come up with all the residue. I sent her pictures. She said, Dad, go on vacation for 2 weeks. She said, they'll be up. And yeah, they came up, and they've been doing really well coming through that residue.
It's uncomfortable to make changes when your livelihood is at stake, and you look out your living room window and you're seeing it, it's staring you right in the face. Never done it before, and you're listening to one of your kids with their crazy hairball ideas. Yeah, it was a stressful spring, but going through it, you know, we still talk. We're not, you know, we don't hate each other after this. and it takes a little bit of faith in the information that's available out there and what other farmers have been seeing, when they adopt these different management practices. And so that was a really big step, and it was stressful. I remember getting calls and pictures sent to me, and it's a disaster. What are we doing? And that's why I said, I'm like, the first couple weeks, first month, it's gonna look terrible. You're not gonna be proud of it at all, but it caught right up. Yeah.
And me being as old as I am, I remember my dad, he was stuck in his ways, and he let me kind of experiment with a few things too. And I figured at my age, I need to be doing that too with the younger generation to let them experiment a little bit. And it's kind of nice while I'm still around to watch it, see, how it turns out. But, because, it won't be too long, not too many more years, or I'll maybe just hang it up, and they'll have to take over and determine which direction we're going. But I think that's really important, that you have to try new things. Like Jennifer said, maybe just on a small scale at first, but you need to try it just to see.
And Mom, you've had a lot of fun with all this, listening to all of our conversations, and then going back and forth of should I, shouldn't I? She gets to hear everything, and she makes the best food ever too. That's why, yeah.
Plus, she's our bookkeeper, so she knows more than I do when we're making money and when we aren't. So she knows the financials really well, and I don't think we've done any work except last year. Of course, with the weather, it wasn't a good year. Otherwise, things been going, and she never says no. You can't do that, so that's a good sign too. So.
We have another question.
So you mentioned the stress and the anxiety of the transition. What would be kind of a piece of advice you would give somebody that is looking at trying it? Maybe how do you deal with that? Is that first stress worth it because then it's less stressful, or do you have any advice on that for beginners?
Oh yeah, how do you deal with the stress? So the stresses of change, you're talking about with that first year with all the residue in the soybeans. Do you have any words of wisdom to help people manage that when they're going through? What can they do to get through that without losing it? Or just going out there with a cultivator and say, forget it, I'm not comfortable.
First of all, you don't blame the people that this is what you're going to do.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You kind of hold back a little bit, just wait and see type of deal. It is stressful to watch it, especially when that's your livelihood, basically. And all farmers are like that. I mean, it's their baby out there, and they want to make sure it comes up. But after the first year, trust you go out there after that year. I never worried about that it was going to come up at all, because I knew it would. And it's just that first change. And being as old as I am, maybe that makes a difference too. The younger people are maybe more apt to change.
Give them Jennifer's number so she can
There you go.
Yeah. I'm not sure how well of a job I did at calming you down, but yeah, and that's, like hearing about what other farmers are doing, talking with other farmers. I know you guys do a lot of research online, different websites and blogs to see what people are doing. And do you find that helpful? Because especially nowadays, where it's a lot harder to get out and be social with people, You're still able to find information out there.
Right, that's what turned me on to this actual vertical tillage now. And, you know, like it seemed to, you know, I should have said earlier, it seemed to really help with the wind erosion also. So it seems to keep everything, you know, undercover, and, you know, we get the 60-mile-an-hour winds, and it keeps our soil out of the neighbor's field.
It's okay if we get the neighbor's soil, but we want to keep ours. No.
Plus the residue this year, you know, from April 1st until, just a month ago, we were sitting on like 6 inches of rain. And I think the residue held that moisture in the ground better, you know, when it really needed to. And since then we had the 3 or 4 inches, you know, on top. But I mean, you could tell the fields that were conventionally tilled. You'd go by and see the corn kind of starting to roll up a little bit, and the beans, their leaves would flip over a little bit. The beans here seemed like they took it all right, you know, so that residue evidently held and kept the soil cooler than it would have otherwise.
Right, especially when there's still open canopy on the soybeans, you know, that sun baking it, you know, without that residue there, that moisture would have been gone. That soil, you know, would have heated up really high and would have cooked and baked our microorganisms. So protecting those underground critters too. And we do have another question.
Have their efforts gained any traction with neighbors?
Have your guys' efforts of what you've been doing out here, the changes you've been making, has that gained any traction with the neighbors at all?
Yeah, I think so. Not we have one neighbor that has an accelerator that's a little ways away that are doing basically what we're doing. Another neighbor that's a large farmer that is doing a lot less tillage now recently. They farm heavy ground where a little more tillage is sometimes needed in our area just to dry it out somewhat. And on the land that's comparable to ours, they've gone a lot less tillage. And, you know, I haven't spoken to them this year just because of the COVID thing, but they seem to be getting good results too with what they're doing. You know, and I think it's catching on in the area as these old timers, you know, retire and give up on it, and the new generation comes in, and also the profit squeeze that we're in right now. Wherever you can save a dime, save a dime. I think that's going to push it along with the water quality.
Well, I want to thank all three of you guys and Holly for being willing to do this, to talk about your management. I know sometimes it's not comfortable, you know, getting down and dirty and saying everything that you're doing. But we're able to provide that to other farmers to know, you know, there is a transition that you can utilize to help improve your soil while not taking a meal kit and still being very productive. It is possible. We have farmers right here doing it, and they're doing an excellent job. And I really appreciate you guys taking the time and putting up with me, you know, digging around in your fields and showing everybody your underwear too. So thank you guys. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Thank you to Craig, Andre, Margaret, and Jennifer, aka the Mold family, and just giving you guys a heads up. Please remember to continue to ask questions in the Facebook Live video comments section, and someone from the Minnesota Soil Health or University of Minnesota Extension will be happy to go ahead and answer those questions in the comments. Also, another reminder to look for those links for those resources about soil health also in the comments section. In 2 weeks, join us again as we discuss soil health concepts with Tim Little of Southeast Minnesota, again at 11 a.m. here on Facebook. Thank you so much for attending Fridays on the Farm.